Hey, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on understand the current economic environment and your brewery. I'm excited to be presenting this data to you and to have this discussion as we talk through kind of current economic trends, what that means for your brewery, and how to best use this data and information to position your brewery in the right place going forward. My name is Josh Lance. I am the founder and managing director of Lance CPA Group. We're a fully virtual and remote CPA practice that works with craft breweries across the country, doing accounting, bookkeeping, tax, payroll, and other consultant services for our brewery clients. And so I'm really excited to kind of talk through this because I know this is a question we're getting a lot from our client base of how do we best position ourselves? How do we deal with the current economic environment, and what should we be doing in our brewery as we go forward here? So really excited to present this here to you all today. Kind of our agenda and what this is going to look like. I'm going to go over some data points here first, kind of looking over what that current economic situation is by the data that is existing out there. And this data is current here as of July 31st is the most recent fresh data we have for this. So this gives us a really good picture, especially as we get into some of the August data and what's looking forward from here, what that looks like and what we should do about that as a brewery. How that really impacts breweries in general, and then what we can do as a brewery to best position ourselves, because it can be very easy when you have maybe some gloomy economic data out there to not want to do anything or kind of to retreat a little bit. But there's actually a lot of opportunities you can do to really position your brewery in the right way, in the right light going forward here. So I'm really excited to be talking with you today. So let's dive into this current economic environment. And a lot of the data that I'm presenting here comes from Gusto, which is a payroll software company. And they're obviously looking at a lot of data that they see from all their customers and what they're seeing come through, as well as macroeconomic data here too. So, right now, their big question is, are we in a recession? Is a recession looming? What's happening here? There is kind of mixed signals going on right now, right? So there's some good things happening, there's some bad things happening, there's some kind of in between things happening here. And so that kind of creates a kind of a really unique situation that we really haven't seen, in kind of the current, in the economic environments that we've had of recent past. And so on the good end of things, right, the labor market's actually pretty strong. There is a lot of job opportunities and people hiring, which is good. There's less, people looking for jobs, and we'll dive into some of that detail there. And obviously, I think you may have even seen that in your own brewery as you're struggling to hire people, retain folks in the brewery. What that looks like, and there is some, potential softening here, but overall, like, labor is actually pretty good. And so in a recessionary environment, you start to see a real kind of downturn in the labor market, and we're not quite seeing that yet. And part of that can be due to just the amount of demand of labor and the lack of supply is causing that. We're not in that inverse situation currently. The kind of the middle of the road thing, where it's not quite good and not quite bad, is consumer demand. We're seeing good spending from consumers, but the consumer sentiment's also really poor. So you have this kind of dichotomy of consumers expecting things to be bad, but they're not actually showing that with their pocketbook. And so spending is still high, although that kind of can be remain to be seen here. A lot of that comes from savings that those customers may have had and really trying to, they may be using that up at this point. And then finally, kind of the macroeconomic conditions aren't as good, right? So obviously, high inflation, persistent inflation that's been significant. And obviously, as a brewer, you're feeling that in your own purchasing power and trying to then deal with that in the inverse of trying to then sell to consumers when the market is a little shaky. So lots of uncertainty at play here as a result there. Some improvement in recent, but still kind of a struggle. And so that create some of these mixed signals here. So we're going to deep dive into this a little bit more. So, and this is data from Gusto and from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics here, where they're looking at job openings and kind of the labor force. And, what's really interesting here is the number of job openings is the most significant it's ever been. So, not only do we have the situation of, people trying to find staff, it's kind of pervasive across the board, and it's the worst it's ever been from that standpoint, right? There's a lot of job openings, a lot of roles to be filled, not a lot of um, people to fill those roles, right? And so there can be a couple reasons for that. One is some people just have determined if kind of take themselves out of the workforce. So especially with the pandemic, that caused a lot of life changes for certain people, and so they may have decided, what, I'm going to pull back from the workforce, or change career paths or do something different, and that's caused a lot of job openings that can't be filled. You also run into a situation of a lot of businesses were kind of propped up and supported by government stimulus over the last couple of years, where businesses may have failed but didn't, due to the stimulus. Even in normal times, they may have failed. And so we have some zombie businesses running where they're still kind of spending through that stimulus, which means they're still having job openings and things to be filled, but their business, besides that cash influx they had, isn't very stable or safe. But even looking at the civilian labor force here too, right? We're kind of back to pre-pandemic levels here, right? So we're seeing that kind of growth in businesses, but the labor force is really just back to where it was at the beginning of 2020. And so we're kind of recovered from the pandemic, but there's still a lot going on. And so that leads to a lot of businesses struggling and hiring, and a lot of businesses trying to get the right people in the door, and having a hard time doing that as a result here. And this graph didn't come across the screen all that well, but I'll kind of explain it a bit. Basically, looking at different industries are affected differently, right? And so leisure and hospitality industries, where breweries would kind of fit in there, as well as wholesale and retail. We're seeing a lot more job openings and not a lot of people who are unemployed looking for jobs, which creates this kind of gap where that gap won't be filled, right? And if you look at that bar chart, the second to last on the bottom there is that leisure and hospitality. And you see such a big gap and dichotomy there of so many job openings, very few people looking for jobs in that industry, which creates a big situation where there'll be a lot of jobs that will just not be filled, right? So when it comes to hiring, you're competing against a lot of people for very limited labor force. And so, those people who are looking for jobs is really kind of a buyer's market there, because they can really go and compare, okay, who's going to give me the best deal, who's going to pay the most, who has the better benefit package, or the better culture in that business. And so, that obviously is a big struggle for breweries, and we're seeing that across our client base, where hiring is hard. And I would say vast majority of our breweries, they're all have now hiring signs or help wanted signs in the windows, looking for staff to work in the brewery, work in the tap room, even in sales positions, because it is highly competitive there. And if you're an employee, you can have your kind of pick of the litter of where you want to go as a result. And then that creates that not only that issue there, but it also increases higher wage prices as well. And so not only we're dealing with inflationary with kind of the goods market, we're dealing with it also in the labor market as well, because now there is more dollars needed to get that same labor as in the past. And this also kind of comes across in the kind of confidence rating that Gusto looks at when they look at quits and voluntary terminations. So, as of kind of right now, that number is kind of high as far as the quit rates and things like that. So for quits and voluntary terminations, meaning the employee has decided to end that employment relationship, not the employer. It's basically 4.2% of employees are in that situation, right? So there's a lot of churn that just comes from that. And again, employees are going to be more willing to quit because they can find better opportunities very easily. And even laid off employees, where there's less of that, kind of layoff activity, they're getting picked up easily too. And so again, that just creates this big cycle here in the labor market as a result. And then we also have the hourly wage wages increasing as well, right? So again, this is from Gusto's data. So they look at all the companies that use Gusto for the payroll services, much like you hear about ADP's payroll data reports. This is very similar. And they're seeing a very rapid increase here in average hourly earnings. So that rate is now up to $32.70 per hour. Now this looks at everybody, right? So that also can get people who are making six figures and things like that. But you're seeing this big increase, year over year as a result, which is pretty significant, right? And even with wages only rising 5.1% last year, and inflation's 9-ish%, right? That's still not even tracking to inflation at this point, too. So that number is going to be expected to increase here over time as a result. There is an uptick in layoffs. I think one of the things that happens in a environment like we're in right now, if you're a business and you are trying to kind of right size the business or kind of reorganize, you're seeing a lot more people doing that layoff activity as a result there, where they're saying, all right, hey, we're willing to lay people off because we're changing how we're operating, or we're, worried about the future. And so we're going to be more proactive now. Which I don't know if, we'll get into this a little bit later, is the right strategy. And in fact, that may be the wrong strategy given how tight the labor market is right now. Letting people go as a kind of precursor to a potential economic environment in the future may actually hurt you more than it helps you, even though you see that big cost number and say, well, I can try to reduce that there. That may not be the best result because, as we're seeing, again, there's just so much demand for workers right now. So what does this mean, right? So talent market will eventually get better, right? They'll eventually get there, but it's still a struggle and will be a struggle for foreseeable future here, right? So you're going to have to compete to get good candidates in, right? And that could go from anywhere from, an entry-level job at your brewery to a more highly seasoned job, right? Like, people want, more things. You're gonna have to compete for that, right? So one of the things you can't do really in a brewery is have a remote or hybrid environment. You need people to show up to brew the beer. You need people to show up to serve the beer to customers. So the dials you can turn with regards to how you work aren't going to exist that same way. So that means you're going to have to do other things for retention, like putting in place 401k plans or health insurance plans or other benefit plans, whereby you can kind of fill, that cup up a little bit more of things you can provide that employee. And more small breweries are doing that because they see that need and see that some employees want. And if they want to retain those employees, they need to do that. So I think that's a big key thing that's coming up here, is if you don't have a robust benefits package, that will hurt you in the long run, because ultimately that is going to cause employees to leave because other breweries are doing that, right? And so we worked with one brewery over the past year where they didn't have a kind of full set of benefits. They just had health insurance. And now they got 401k, they have dental, they have vision, they have a commuter benefit plan, they have a FSA, they got an HSA plan with their health insurance. And so they have all these other benefits now that are in play, which then makes them more attractive to employees that are looking for jobs. And that's really started to help them with their retention rates as well. Again, retention is important, right? So it's not just bringing people in, it's keeping people there. And one of the things we've seen is looking at some data sets is that for our brewery clients, they're long-term employees, so employees that have been with them for more than a year have stuck with them longer than employees that are relatively new, right? So employees they've hired in the last year have churned a lot more quicker than their historical averages. And so, again, we want to take steps to increase retention. So, beyond benefits, that means creating the right culture and things in place where employees feel valued, they feel cared for, they feel taken care of in the brewery, in that business setting, right? And so, if you're not investing in your culture and not investing in your benefits and not investing in that kind of people functionality within your brewery, that's where you can start to lose people. Or if you are investing, that's where you're going to start to gain the right people in and get people to stick around longer as a result there. And then also, when it comes to benefits here, trying to find things that can add more value, it becomes important, right? So retirement benefit plans are a good one, because it's not just covering a benefit for today, it's really covering a benefit for the future, and providing tax benefit and additional pay, with your matches. And so that really helps. And what Gusto has found is businesses that have retirement plans in place, so a basic 401k, which you can do very, very cheaply now to put into play, substantially reduce their 12-month attrition risk, which is huge, right? So, you can't do other things that other businesses can, like remote and hybrid work, but simply just putting a retirement plan in place pays huge dividends. And Gusto's seen that in their data, and we're seeing it with our client data, that those businesses that have retirement plans in place, those breweries that are doing that, are doing much better with retention than breweries that don't. Oh, let's talk about the consumer confidence part, because that's where we now run into this issue. And what's making this economic condition so hard is it's really hard to get people in there, but then the consumer attitude is all over the board here, right? So right now, the consumer sentiment is at a historic low, and buyers are feeling very squeezed. And sometimes they're more squeezed than they realize. And sometimes they see things in the macroeconomics that make them feel like they're more squeezed, right? So one of the biggest, kind of commodity things that people are very aware of is gas prices, right? And so what the gas prices are because you drive down the road, you see gas stations, see those prices, and you see those things, pop up and be more expensive. Obviously, that gives you some pause and makes you, a little bit more leery. But that's a basic commodity price point that is kind of in your face on a regular basis, right? So the general consumer isn't looking at what the price of the barrel of oil is on a regular basis, or what is the grain prices or things like that, but they do see gas prices. And so that, I think, really impacts that consumer sentiment. And as you even seen that graph in that chart there, right, you see it really kind of bottom out at the beginning of the summer. Now it's picked back up. And the kind of correlation there is gas prices are starting to come down. And so consumers are getting a little bit, feeling a little bit better about things, even though, things in the overall economy haven't shifted that much, right? Inflation hasn't changed really at all over the summer, but people have seen the gas prices change. And so that is their kind of North point to figure out, okay, if they feel confident enough in the market or not. And so right now you have basically consumer sentiment really low, significantly low. I mean, the last time it was that low was, in the height of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009 time period, right? And we were basically, below those periods, at the beginning of the summer. Now, again, that's picked back up a little bit, but it's still been hard, right? And so you have that one kind of thing going on with consumers. And then you have the other thing is they're not changing their spending habits, which is, kind of surprising, right? And so some of that is, you see just in that chart there, spending habits changed significantly in the beginning of 2020, really kind of close through that 2020 year in the first year of the pandemic, because people weren't going out, they weren't spending money, they were saving money, and then they had additional stimulus coming in as well, that kind of further increased their savings there, right? So currently spending's keeping up with inflation, and it's, as the kind of chart goes here, people aren't changing their actual spending. Now, they will change what they spend on, but their spending levels actually aren't changing. So you have this weird dichotomy right now of people think the economy is really bad, but they're not changing how they spend. And part of this is going to be due to how long kind of this inflation kind of bubble happens here. The longer inflation's at these high levels, that may further push people to reduce their spend, as well as other changes in the economic environment, right? A lot of what they're spending right now is built up from personal savings. And so, how the next couple months shakes out really kind of determine if we go into that recession territory or not. Because if the spending keeps up, then we're probably gonna be okay, because inflation looks to tail, or is kind of at its peak right now, and we'll look to tail here. And so if people continue to kind of spend through it effectively, spend through inflation, this kind of inflationary period, we probably won't hit that recession that we think we're at or potentially at. Now, what this does mean, though, is there could be some demand softness coming up here. And I know brewers are kind of struggle with this over summer. Summer has been soft, particularly the front half of the summer. over the latter half, and at least in the breweries that we're looking at right now. The first kind of, the May, June time period was kind of rough and below expectations. August picked back up. July was kind of at expectations. August has been better. But there can be some demand softness, right? In what people are going to spend and how they spend their money and what choices they make, right? So again, they may continue to spend the same amount of money. They may choose though now how they're spending it, right? And so maybe less on kind of luxury or kind of things that they don't necessarily need, and more on what they do need because those costs are going up as a result, right? And so, again, we'll see how that consumer expectations look in the next couple months here and see how those are changing here, right? And if we do get a situation where kind of savings is run dry and now spending has softened up, that will probably accelerate us closer to recession there. Prices have stabilized. Again, inflation's kind of, it's at its peak, but it's not growing really as much anymore. And with rising wages, again, that spend is still happening there. As a brewery, what you want to kind of do is look at, okay, what are my current cash sources? And there are other things I can do to help prop that up, right? So if things do soften in demand and we're starting to see, maybe a bad end of the third quarter into the fourth quarter, what can we do there, right? So looking at different tax credit opportunities, SBA loans, other grants that become available. So a lot of state and local grants from the pandemic have taken a while to actually get set up, and now we're starting to get set up in some locations. And so there's still some pandemic money out there. It's just taking some time, especially if it's been kind of allocated on the state and local levels for it to actually be put into place. So especially around, like, if you have a brew pub and restaurant type situation, there's some funds upcoming here at different state levels. I know we have that in Illinois. And it's going to be likely in other states too, where you start to see some more grants come up here, especially as leisure and hospitality struggle. We'll see some more of that happen at the state and local level. And so the big question is, will there be a recession, right? So if you look at kind of when recession has happened in the past, you usually have these kind of troughs that happen. And you see those kind of troughs happen in, where those blue bars are at on the graph. Those are recessionary periods. And you see right before those blue bars, a real kind of tank here in the 10-year Treasury constant maturity, less the 3-month Treasury constant maturity. And so we're seeing a little bit of that tank. We're not seeing it at the levels of 2008 or 2008, 2009, or 2001-ish time period, right? And so we're not seeing that precipitous drop. It is lower. And so if there is recession, it's going to be mild. But again, we may be in a situation where, we don't have the recession because of the labor market and because of consumer spending the way it is right now. So what do we do about that, right? So I think one of the big concerns brewery owners have and questions we got from our clients is, what do we do with a recession? Is a recession going to be bad for us? Is it good for us? What should we be doing differently? And I think the big thing you can do, and we'll talk about some of this in a little bit here, is how can we actively, make plans and monitor what's going on, right? So I think one of the things the pandemic did for a lot of breweries is got them more hyper-focused on their financials and their cash positions and cash flow management. And so those same skills learned in the pandemic, right? We can't lose those now. We have to pay attention to that and continue that on here, right? So things can change, right? We may get spikes. There may be, some sudden softness in demand, couple of sudden softness in hiring, right? And things change on a dime. And if we get those softnesses happening both in labor and demand for consumers, then that may accelerate us to a recession. And so we have to be kind of vigilant here as kind of what's going on, how we kind of managing this. I think a big one of this too is focusing on how we optimize value as a brewery versus minimizing costs, right? So what we don't want to do is overcorrect in a situation. So, and you're seeing some breweries and some businesses take this tack where it's, I think recession's coming, so we're going to pull back. We're going to pull back on growth. We're going to lay off people. We're going to cut costs where we can. And those things can be good practices, but if we're just cutting costs for the sake of cutting costs, then that may get us into a position where we've overcorrected. And then when things turn and we're not in the right position now, we may actually hurt our business as a result there. So, paying attention to that, I think is vitally important in there, that we don't want to overcorrect, and really want to think about the long run. And any of things you do in your brewery, you want to have that North Star is where is your brewery going? What's your plans for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And we want to focus on that, right? And the economy is going to shift, for the good and for the bad, right? And so if we start to deviate from that North Star and just kind of dance based on kind of short-term economic conditions, we're actually going to do more damage to our business there. So we want to kind of think about the long run, think the long term, and make our decisions based on that, not based on, okay, what is these, kind of shifting sands in the economy that may be weak now, but may be great a year from now, or maybe worse a year from now. So let's think about this, particularly into the impact of breweries, right? So that was a pretty broad kind of economic analysis. And again, thanks to Gusto for putting all that together. They did a really great job of kind of pulling all that data and making it digestible there. So when we think about this from a brewery issue, right, you got to think about, okay, what's currently happening in breweries and how can we fix and adjust there, right? So obviously staffing issues are a big concern. And so that's one thing. And then it's this consumer sentiment that's been kind of all over the place. Again, I think some breweries have seen, drop offs where they expected gains and vice versa. And so trying to make sure that we kind of figure out what's going on and think about, okay, from the general sense of beer, are we kind of immune to some of this stuff, right? And are we making too much out of the economy when we really shouldn't here? So again, staffing is really hard. And we're, again, seeing that staffing be continually hard here. But I think the big part here is how do we ensure we have the right staff in place? And I think in the short run, that means investing in benefits, investing in culture, investing in increased salary rates, providing raises and bonuses to our current staff to keep up with inflation. And we're going to you're kind of have to eat it a little bit when it comes to staffing because we're just going to have this increased cost in the short term. But the long term aspect is we need staff to work with us and continue with us in the not just for now, but a year from now. And we want to make sure we're in position to have the right quality staff. And so, being really diligent around the hire and retention process, I think becomes a big part of this and ensuring that we're doing the things today that sets us up for success in the long run too. So while that may mean more costs now, when we really don't want to have more costs because, our cost of ingredients are higher, our cost of packaging is higher, all of our other costs that we have are higher. The one thing we have big control over is labor. You may want to kind of think to err of like, okay, well, I don't want to increase things too much or not invest in benefits now, but it's actually probably the time to do it. Because if we can't retain staff and we can't hire the right people in the right seats in our brewery, we're going to struggle to exist and grow in the future, right? And so, paying attention to that, I think is really critical and important. And making sure you have good dialogue with your staff and understand, okay, what are we doing? What makes sense for you, right? Like, so before you just start throwing benefits at them, survey your staff and say, okay, what benefits would you like if we added them, or what benefits do we don't currently have that we would like to have, and see what that sentiment is, because we can kind of align to what people are wanting. Then that obviously again helps with retention and culture in your brewery and makes it so that those the brewery staff, can really feel like they are, they're able to stay at your company in the long run. Another big thing with staff is its impact on customer experience, right? And we've all been to restaurants and places where they're short staffed, things take longer, food quality is not as good, the experience is not as good. And a big thing that keeps people coming back to a brewery is that experience that they have. And so thinking about your own kind of what's the customer experience kind of cycle in your brewery. So when someone comes into the tap room, how are they greeted? What is that experience you want them to have? And ensuring that happens even when you don't have all the staff in place to do that. So, thinking about what that looks like, right? And so that may mean kind of shifting how staff work and shifting how you may have done things in the past, right? So seeing a lot more of, the scan barcodes at the tables and having, orders done through your phone and then get delivered to your table. while that may be more efficient, does that provide a great customer experience there or not? Or if we do that, how can we elevate the customer experience in another way, right? So do we have people checking on them and making sure they're doing okay and things like that when we kind of automate the ordering process, at their tables? And so think about that from the experience perspective, that we want to make sure that we can provide good service and get beer sold and have people come back and again and again. But we don't want to get in a situation where, in doing so and trying to automate the human element out, that we've actually created a poor experience, and that consumer doesn't come back in to our brewery. Another thing around consumer sentiment is, when we have kind of a recessionary environment, it's more likely that customers will trade off expensive good for less expensive alternatives, right? So they won't change their consumption pattern per se, but they will change what they buy, right? And so again, we saw that low consumer sentiment that's kind of hangs over the current economic environment, even though consumers are spending. But what they're likely going to do is continue that spending level, but change what they buy, right? And so one of the things they're going to do is make that trade-off. And now for craft, what that means is, for craft beer, what's that trade-off going to be, right? It's likely that a craft beer drinker isn't going to trade off to Miller Lite, although they could, or a kind of a macro brand. But they may change the type of style they drink, right? So maybe they were really kind of excited about the demand of like a double IPA or those kind of heavier, milkshake, stouts or pastry stouts or things like that, right? Where, those were more heavier, they're bigger alcohol type things, and now they're trading down a little bit. And there's more demand for basic styles, right? So, and kind of understand that that consumer sentiment. How are we kind of shifting how we brew or what we brew there to keep that up, right? So, a lot of breweries have different lineups of what they sell, and there are many different styles they're focused on. But one of the things you may want to think about is, okay, if a consumer's trading down to a less expensive alternative, how do we provide that? Is there a beer in our portfolio right now that we can kind of angle them to, that maybe they haven't tried before, or maybe now is a better fit for them, right? And so we're also seeing that from a demand of more of that core style or that core lineup, because that consumer may, with a core lineup, they find that beer they like will come back again and again and again, versus, well, I really like that beer, but now I came to your brewery and you have a bunch of different stuff and that isn't that. So that may make me not want to come the next time, right? So to the extent you can have kind of those regular core beers where, consumers like them and they come back and again for that. And so we're starting to see breweries pivot more to that, having more of those flagship type beers. They're always on tap, versus kind of switching things out all the time and kind of chasing fads or chasing what's kind of currently hot out there, because again, as consumer sentiment shifts, they're going to kind of shift back to basics here, and having that steady lineup is important to not only get that consumer to trade into that beer, but then also to keep on buying that beer because they know it's available. This also may push them to purchase more from retailers than on premise. If they're trying to lower costs, they may go and buy that 6-pack from the retailer versus showing up and having a couple pints at your establishment. And so understanding that trade-off too, right? And ensuring that you can meet that demand and it is important. So to the extent that you are really kind of focused on the tap room and on-premise experience, and doing limited self-distribution, kind of see how those are playing out in the next month or two, and seeing if there's more demand there than what you expect, and making sure you can fulfill that, to see where your consumers go. And then making sure you focus more on bringing people into the tap room. So that may mean more activities you're doing to bring people in. So different events that you have, live musicians, game nights, trivia nights, whatever that may be, right? When that consumer is looking to maximize their value of the dollar, going to your tap room and having a couple of beers while also listening to musician provides additional value versus just going there in doing that. If there's nothing else drawing them in, they're more likely to make that trade to drink at home versus at your brewery, right? And that's obviously going to change that profit dynamic there. And so that's another place where we've seen, some breweries start cutting costs around marketing, especially around, events and doing things like that, because there are costs associated there. But those things are actually really important to make sure people have an experience in your tap room, and they want to kind of maximize that experience. So the more that they can do there, or more they can experience there, the better. Again, the question is beer immune, right? So in past recessionary cycles, right, beer has actually done well, and it's one that gets traded into if a consumer normally drank whiskey or rum or things like that, which kind of trade down to a cheaper alcohol alternative, right? And so general beer does well in a recession, but you actually has to be the right type of beer, right? So if your brewery is just constantly cranking out double IPAs and pastry stouts, right, that's not going to probably cut it right now. And so you have to think about, okay, what are the things I can put in play that allows me to still get that beer consumer just with a different beer or a different type of beer that is ultimately, maybe even less expensive for us to brew and gives us better margins as well, right? And so thinking about from that cost perspective too, I think it's important. But the big thing is, identifying what lessons we learned in the pandemic. So as people change their buying habits and their attitudes in the pandemic, right? They're likely going to return to those sentiments in a recession. And so what do you do to make sure that you can, weather that storm and take those lessons learned from the pandemic to learn into this potential recessionary situation? And then also making sure you're understanding and identifying change in appetites of the consumer. So monitor this, and I'm sure a lot of you do this already, but if you're not, monitor your taproom sales and see, okay, are we getting a lot more people buying our golden ale versus maybe our IPA, and is there a shift there where people are shifting down to maybe the cheaper beer on our menu versus one that's a little bit more expensive? And so if we're seeing that shift or that change, right, we're kind of getting that taste or an early indicator that consumer sentiment has changed here. And we need to be able to adapt to that. So we're not just putting a bunch of IPAs on our taps that aren't selling. Instead, we're putting the beers that are going to sell on the taps. And we're putting the right things in front of the consumer that they're actually looking for. So how do we put our brewery in the best position here going forward, right? So in doing this and kind of thinking through how we best do it, it's important to kind of, again, take lessons learned, but also put yourself in the position to succeed here, right? And try avoid the panic that can happen where we think the sky is falling and we start to make decisions that deviate from our North Star and deviate from what we're trying to accomplish in our brewery, right? So there's really kind of 4 things that you can do to put yourself in the best position. We'll talk through these 4 items here in detail, but I think it's important to, again, position yourself for success because there's going to be a lot of breweries that don't, and start to retreat or make decisions that they may feel good in the short term, but actually are going to be bad for them in the long term. And so you want to capitalize on maybe some of that as well if you position yourself in the right way. So again, pricing is a big one. We've been talking with our clients about pricing for over a year now of increase your price. I think there's a lot of hesitation increasing price. You're not sure how people are going to adapt to that. If people are going to like that, not like that. And the reality is when we see brewers increase their price, they're not seeing a change in demand. And so, while consumers are being price sensitive, you do have to take in consideration your costs have increased, right? We talked a bit about labor cost increases and further than that increase, as well as all the other material cost increase that you've had and other costs for other things you purchase. You have to adjust your pricing accordingly, right? And so I think the concern that breweries have, they haven't adjusted their price, and now they're like, okay, well, inflation's high, economy's maybe not great. I don't want to increase price because I may lose consumers and then I'm in trouble. There are ways you can adjust here, right? And you don't have to take all these ways, but you can do some of them, right? And so the first one is kind of the shrink inflation way of maybe we're going to keep our price for that beer the same. We're going to sell you our IPA for $7, but instead of it being a 16-ounce pour, it's a 12-ounce pour, a 14-ounce pour, where we're reducing the amount what we're giving them, but keeping the price the same, right? And so, that does, from a psychology perspective, the consumer thinks prices haven't changed, even though what they're getting is less. Now, from a business owner perspective, maybe that's not what you want to do, because what you don't want to create a situation where your consumers are getting less and then they're upset about that, and that creates a poor experience. But it may be important to think about that too. And this also gets into, if you're not willing to change the price point, look at the cost associated with what you're doing there, right? And if certain beers are more costly now than they have in the past based on different ingredient costs or things like that, may need to change up how you think about pricing around those. I think one thing that could work really well, and we've seen work well in breweries, is offer up more optionality in purchasing for your clients or for your customers. And so maybe you set a standard price, right? This beer is $8, this beer is $7. There's not a whole lot of differentiation there, but now maybe we start to offer that, right? So, and this goes beyond just doing taster pours or flights of beer, doing half pours or things like that, right? Where that consumer can, may want to try a couple of beers, but because of the cost, right, they don't want to go all in on a 16-ouncer. So maybe offering an 8 or a 7, where they can, get more than a taster, but less than the kind of a full pour. And the way you price that is, if we're pricing that 16-ounce at $7, we may price the 8-ounce at $4 or $5. And so if they buy 2 of those, right, obviously that's more than the price they pay on the 16. But if they want to try different things or kind of that searching pattern again, right, that may help in that. And may get more people again to try things out or purchase because they can buy more in theory, even though they're getting lesser pours. So that's another way to create some optionality. And this is common in a lot of places where you do three-tier pricing. And so trying that in your own brewery with different sizes, if you're not currently doing it, can be helpful and actually bringing more revenue as a result. And the third thing is creating a subscription to your brewery. So I know a lot of breweries have done mug clubs or things like that. This is a little different concept in that you want people to actually subscribe to the brewery and not just, you're in a mug club, you get a discount when you come in, and we have a mug club party once a year and things like that, right? It's actually where they're actually subscribing to a purchase of beer allotment every month, right? So whether that is they come in and their subscription gets them 3 16-ounce pours a month. What that does is, one, they've already kind of prepaid for it. So if they don't use it, they don't use it, right? And that's revenue in your pocket. But what it does get them to do is come in on a regular basis and use what they've already pre-purchased, right? So, and in doing so, they're likely to spend more money as well, right? So they may come in and have one of their 16 ounces, but they may try a taster of a higher alcohol beer or something else too, or they may buy a 4-pack to go or 6-pack to go, and so that really can help out too. And I think that becomes important as well, because that will actually get people in and do that. And so you can again experiment. Obviously you have to be careful with local laws on how you do that, but I've started to see some breweries do this, and that actually works out really well because it gets people to come in over and over and over again as a result. And again, you can experiment with how you do the subscription too, right? So maybe it's not for actual pours, but it's for to-go beer, or it's for a crowler, or for something else, or maybe it changes up on a monthly basis, or even in that subscription, they may get access to a special beer before the public gets access, or things like that, right? So building in ways where that gives them benefits, right? You see wineries do this a lot with their wine clubs, where they're sending wine out, or they're encouraging people who own that wine club membership to come to their winery on a regular basis. Not only does that get that recurring revenue stream, it actually gets people to spend more money with your establishment as a result. Costs. Let's think about costs, right? So one of the things you don't want to do is walk away from this and start cutting costs willy-nilly, because that's not going to be helpful. And again, that may take us away from our ultimate goals. So first we want to do is kind of break out our costs into different buckets, and because some of that stuff we can have more control of than others, right? So first thing is be clear on your direct material costs, right? So in your recipe formulations and the costs that go into that beer, be clear on what that actually is, how that cost has changed, and see if there's ways to make alternatives to that. So maybe it's bulk purchasing. Maybe it's realizing that, yeah, we use this ingredient, but we have a lot of waste when we do that. And so how do we reduce that stuff? So being more, having more kind of controls around your inventory and making sure that you're using what you're using, and we're not running into overruns or waste is important. But also looking at your purchasing power and determine, okay, are we actually getting the best price for these ingredients, or is there other vendors that can, potentially beat that price, right? And so your vendors, the people you're buying raw ingredients from, are having their same pressures, right? And so they want to ensure that they're continuing to sell. And to the extent that they can get you to buy more from them, they're going to reward that. And for those that want your business, right, they may be willing to discount in order to get that. And so, you may have used the same suppliers and you're kind of comfortable with that, but don't hesitate to kind of shop around a little bit and see what else is out there, and just see what else ways we can kind of minimize that cost there the best we can, because not only that will help us understand that cost of the beer and help us with the pricing on that beer if we need to increase prices, but it also lets us kind of say, like, hey, if we want to shift our consumers into a different style of beer, or get them more focused on one of our beers with bigger margins, we know what those are, and we can kind of train them, our consumers, to buy that beer over maybe our ones with our lesser margins, because we want that profit margin is just going to go to profitability at the end of the day. We also want to make sure we understand our overall cost structure. So again, this is not a let's go cut costs. Let's understand what our costs are. Pay attention to the financials you have. If you're not having regular bookkeeping done and you're not getting regular monthly financials, make sure you're doing that. You want to keep tabs as to what's happening, the trends that you're seeing in your costs, because those things are shifting and you're not aware of how they're shifting. You may be too late to make some changes that you need to make there. So we want to make sure that you kind of understand your costs in total, and understand, okay, if we are going to make some cuts or some changes, that we're making them more strategically and not just kind of cutting things because we think those are the most expensive or the ones that are easier to cut. We also want to make sure that when we think about those costs, look at different opportunities and things we can do to adjust there, right? So, maybe we can change, that particular vendor with a different pricing structure, or, maybe we can think about, how we can get the most out of that cost. So when it comes to things like marketing, for instance, really understand what's that return on investment we have in marketing, and making sure those dollars we spend on marketing, which are critical to us bringing customers in the door and getting our beer sold, are actually returning the right thing. And so you may have had more of a kind of a spray and pray approach when it comes to marketing, and just kind of throwing a bunch of things out there and hoping for the best. I think this is a time to really understand that cost a bit more, and seeing, okay, well, what things we do in marketing works better than the others, so you can best determine, okay, how we best spend those dollars. And then the last one here is to track those labor costs. We know they're going to be higher. We know those are going to increase, but be cognizant of that, right? And so all these costs are costs we have to understand and absorb, and ultimately that influences our pricing decisions too. So going back to that pricing slide, understanding our price and how we do pricing, becomes really important. If we don't have that cost information, then we're just kind of guessing, and this is not the time to guess. This is the time to be really kind of in tune with how we're pricing things. And then going along with price and cost is cash flow. And so being real crystal clear about your cash flow, and understanding your cash flow does not mean you just look at the balance of your bank account. That is the wrong way to look at it, and that's usually get you into more trouble than good. And so understand your cash flow, what's coming in, what's coming out, what's the cycles on those. When we sell through wholesale, what is the days outstanding in our AR? And how can we improve that and bring that money in there, right? When it comes to payables, making sure you have tracking on all of our bills outstanding, and make plans on how we want to pay it. So we're not just paying things because they came in, or it's the first bill in, so it's the first one I pay out. But we actually pay those more strategically based on the terms that they give us, right? So those net 30 and net 45 terms are important, because that just helps us better manage cash flow as a result of that. And so one of the things we do with our clients during the pandemic that worked out well was look at kind of 12-week cash flow forecasts in the future to say, okay, can we best manage cash, right? So we're thinking about, okay, we have some bills to pay. When are we paying those bills? How do we manage that when we know we have payroll to do and we have money coming in the door and we're timing things out the right way? Because when things get rough in the economy and let's say sales decrease, right, we want to make sure we are, using our money in the best way possible. And so putting those 12-week cash flow forecast out are helpful. It helps to see if there's issues in the future where maybe there is some softness in incoming cash that we have to think about and best plan for. And it's a lot easier to plan for those and figure out those problems in advance versus realizing you don't have cash to make payroll on Friday, and now you're scrambling trying to fix that, and you're investing your own money into the brewery to kind of cover that, right? That gets into a real snowball issue of poor cash mismanagement, and is only going to lead to ruin there in the future. So really pay attention to that, and again, don't just stare at your bank balance because that's not going to give you an accurate sense as to what your cash flow looks like. The final one here is the kind of zag when everyone zigs, right? So a lot of businesses and some of the top businesses in the country, they got to where they got because when the recession came, they actually positioned themselves in the right spot and took advantage of the economic situation to their benefit, right? So they didn't let the economic situation dictate how they ran their business. They did the reverse. And so there's going to be a lot of breweries that are going to zig here, right? They're going to retreat. They're going to freak out again, right? Like they may throw in the towel because they just got done with the pandemic and now they're dealing with the recession and they're just done, right? Like, they barely made it out with the pandemic and now this happens and now they've given up, right? And so this may be the time to zag while your competitors are zigging around and not making the right decisions here. So, this is not the time to retreat and to kind of inward focus, but it's the time to say, okay, what can we do? Again, thinking about our strategic plan forward, what can we do to help elevate that plan or accelerate where we want to go? So things look out right now, mergers and acquisitions. I've seen more M&A activity in the last 6 months than I have in a long time in the brewery space. And so whether that is, breweries are going out of business and you're acquiring that one to pick up a new location or at least just new equipment to expand your growth. We have a couple of acquisitions that are going to close here in the next week with our client base. And so, and those were very different on how they went about it. But basically they saw an opportunity to pick up, either strategic assets or strategic IP or strategic locations for their growth and take advantage of that, even though the economic situation isn't the kind of rosy situation you would normally think to do that in. This actually may be the time to do that. If your strategy is really dependent on taproom sales, going into multi-locations is important too. So as a recession happens, what you end up seeing is a lot of softness in rents, especially in kind of retail spaces where businesses have closed up and left. This may be the time to think about, okay, maybe I move in and do that second location or that third location that I wanted to do. And we're seeing in breweries, really advance those plans right now. The ones that are being strategic, advance those multi-location plans. And then look at opportunities to diversify, right? So whether that is getting into new business lines, a lot of people gone to try the hard seltzer or other routes like that, but are there business lines that make sense to your brewery that would fit in nice? And is this the time to look into those? Or is it, again, ways where you can diversify through, maybe offering up contracting opportunities or things like that. So look at ways we can bring in new revenue into the brewery, because again, that's ways we can ensure our survival and do the things we want to do. And so, where some breweries may freeze up and not make those decisions or kind of put their head in the sand, this is the time to make those decisions. And we saw breweries that did that during the pandemic, where a lot of breweries kind of froze up and wasn't sure what to do and didn't do anything, or did things that were hurt their long-term success. We saw breweries that actually did things that helped their long-term success, and really they grew their brewery as a result because they took advantage of that opportunity where breweries we're kind of seeing in that opportunity to them. They take advantage of it, and it really helped grow their brewery. So think about that. Think about your long-term plans of what you want your brewery to be, and determine, okay, are there ways we can help accelerate that now based on what's going on, right? So there's going to be plenty of brewery closures that will happen, recession or not. People kind of packing up shop and being done, or finally throwing in the towel here. And so, does that provide opportunities for your growth, where you can do a turnkey solution, or at least get the type of equipment you need to grow the way you want to grow? So that we're kind of at time here, or kind of ended up at time. I don't know if we'll have any questions right now, but if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I know this is kind of a lot of breweries have a lot of questions and what's going on and how should you best prepare. We're happy to have those conversations with you and kind of talk about what we're seeing in the market, and what we're seeing that's working and not working. And so really leverage the experience of us working with over 100 breweries to your advantage as a result. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. I have contact information there, my email on the screen. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to answer those questions to you. Especially as you view this and you have those questions, don't hesitate to reach out. If you're interested at all, at the beginning of the year, we do an event called Unfiltered, which is where we take all of the brewery data that we have from our client base, as well as some of our friends in the brewing space, and put together a benchmarking analysis report that looks at the trends in the industry and trends in different sizes of breweries, and breweries doing kind of specific types of operations, and saying, okay, what are we seeing here in the marketplace? And based on this, what should we do, or what do we learn from this? And if you want to participate in that and have your brewery data as a part of that, we'd love to have you in that as well. We released all that information kind of the last week of January. We'll do a webinar event around that as well, where we kind of talk through that information, as well as have some guest speakers as well. So with that, we can wrap up here. Again, thank you everyone for joining. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those for you. Shoot me an email, and we'll see you next time.